All right, I've got another video where I am going to diagnose for you a set of broken cost caps in an ad account. I've done a few of these. If you've followed my content, you know that I run almost all my ads on bid caps and target ROAS and some cost caps as well, but that I'm really strongly pro cost controls. And so it comes up all the time that somebody says, I want to run bid caps, I want to run cost caps, but it's just not working. I'm just not getting the outcome that I want. And specifically, this chart shows you something beyond sort of the cost caps not working. And so this is the context that I had on this video. And I want to show you, and on this ad account, and so I want to show you what context I came in with, okay? So what you see here is day by day, the blue line is CAC blended across the entire site, day by day. The red line is a 7-day blended CAC. So it kind of gives you the trends of everything, and the pink lines are overlaid. You can see things are going better and worse and all those things over time. So so what you see is back in here where I'm looking right now, this peak, this was a really specific thing that's sort of irrelevant to this conversation. Some Advantage Plus campaigns with changes in how audiences were defined, and ultimately the key net effect here, the only thing that's really going to matter here is that after this, when the CAC went back down, one of the things that happened over that time was that all existing customers were taken out of Advantage Plus audiences. So there's a 0% existing customer cap on all of the Advantage Plus campaigns. Okay, so that's the kind of the key thing. That's the first point. The second point is you can see the trend lines here, the pink in particular, where the CAC is just steadily going up from this is June basically, right in here where my mouse is right now. So somewhere along those lines, between 3 and 4 there. And then it goes up through number 5 into past July. And you can see CAC is sort of going up, just hitting over $200 after being quite a bit lower than that in May and June. And so what is going on for this ad account? Now, this ad account runs at a pretty high CAC. It's high AOV in the $500 range. So why would this be the case? The other thing the advertiser pointed out to me that is really significant here is the frustration he was feeling about how low and high the differences are here. Put another way, these CACs get so high, and in his view, those are throwing off the performance going on. So these high CAC days are ruining him, and so they're hurting the low. If he could just eliminate the high CAC days and have low CAC be better, that's particularly frustrating since aren't cost controls supposed to deliver for you consistent CAC? So why do the CACs range so much? Why is this ad account like that? Now, the first thing I will point out here is that on the left side of the graph, this was not all running on cost controls as best as I understand it, and there is still huge amounts of variation in that time from day to day. So you see the CAC ranges day to day at every point in this graph. There is no point at which it does not do that. Whether there's cost controls in the ad account or not, the CAC is simply inconsistent on a day-to-day basis. And that is a really important detail to think about when you think about what cost controls do, because I think this makes a lot of people crazy. What gets them so frustrated is the way that the CAC varies when isn't it supposed to be the case that cost controls get me consistent CAC? So what is going on? So before we deal with the upslope in CAC over this time period, I want to talk a little bit about that day-to-day variation that you see, because it is the case that this ad account is driven primarily by cost caps along the sort of from about number 3 through number 4 and into number 5 on this graph, okay? And the big point that I want to make here is that it is not the case that every purchase is going to be at your CAC. It is not the case that that's going to happen. First of all, at the baseline level, you're actually not optimizing for most people for a single day CAC. You're optimizing for a 7-day CAC, 7-day click. And if you have 1-day view in there, that's going to do that as well. Okay. So you're actually not optimizing for a single day of performance. And so those single days are just part of the deal. You're going to get higher days and lower days, okay? Secondly, the fewer number of purchases that you are getting, the more variation you're going to see, right? So if this advertiser was spending $100,000 a day, I can almost guarantee you it would all look way smoother. The CAC would not vary nearly so much. But every single day is a very small sample size. So this is one of the first things I looked at when I looked over at the ad account, okay? So we can come in here, and I'm going to actually go to a different screen. Here you go. What you'll see is that on a week, this is the main cost cap campaign. This is a top spending campaign in this ad account, okay? In fact, what I did, first of all, by the way, if you're wondering kind of how I diagnosed this, the first thing I did is I looked over this time period. We'll just take May through, sorry, I'm going outside of the window a little bit, I know, through August. and just looked, what's the top spending campaign, okay? This is something I always do when I diagnose ad accounts. The first thing I'm always looking at is where did the money go? Because that is going to tell you the vast majority of what happened. So in this case, $333,000 spent. The top campaign is this $135,000 campaign, and the number 2 is $49,000. Now we've covered over half the spend. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff in here that definitely does matter. Probably some time-limited stuff. This is a shoes brand, and so they have probably various SKUs coming in and out, etc. It's even more stark if we go into May and June, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, so now you got 193,000 total in spend, 120 of that on this Advantage Boomer campaign, and that's also a cost cap campaign that's driving the majority of the spend. So the first thing I wanted to do, if I'm going to understand what's going on in this ad account, is go follow the money. Okay, so I go and look at this campaign specifically, and then what I did was I had it preloaded here just so you don't have to watch any load time. I grabbed this campaign, and in this case, I've got January through August. Okay, so basically entirety of the first 8 months of the year here. And I've got this one campaign selected, and we've got it week by week over that whole time period, okay? And if you look at this week by week over that time period, what you'll see is that in any given week, in the conversion window, this is, I checked this right away, 7-day click or 1-day view. That's the attribution setting, okay? One thing I'll flag right away. I personally never include view attribution in my attribution settings for a number of reasons, including that it really muddies the waters of what is actually happening in an ad account, okay? But at the spend level that we're getting here, I don't mind running ASC in this case. You're going to get all of your top spending ads in one ad set. Hopefully, get more consistency on the performance because you're getting all those in one place instead of having a million ad sets, each getting 1 or 2 purchases every couple days. Because in this case, if you see on this $500 AOV at this level of spend, what you've got is in a given week. Let's just use the attribution setting that is the standard attribution for this campaign, which is 7-day click, 1-day view. So if I just have purchase ROAS over that time, what you see is I have split out here these other attribution settings, right? 1, 7, and 20-day click. But this is the standard setup. In this attribution setting, what you'll see, in the purchases level, same thing. This is 7-day click and 1-day view purchases. What you'll see is 34, 62, 69, up to 100. At the peak, you got 140 purchases, but down here, you've got 76, 78, until eventually it gets turned off, gets turned back on down here. And that means that in any given day, right, you are reporting on a 7-day click basis, you are reporting at a maximum, at the very peak of this spend, 20 purchases. And that might sound like kind of a lot, but in this campaign, but actually 20 purchases is a pretty small sample size. And this is one of the things that I would say, and by the way, a lot of these are much lower than that, right? You got 10 purchases per day for a lot of these, even less than that. Okay, on average. And you just need to understand that sample sizes being what they are means that at a daily level, you are going to have more variation. You just are. You're just going to have more variation. That's because people's behavior is all over the place. It is actually not totally 100% predictable who is going to buy from you, as good as Meta's machine learning is. And so there is going to be some daily variation in that spend. And in those purchases over that time, all right? And so actually, if we go and we look at this, you'll see this really clearly. The day-to-day here shows this really wide range. This is taking us all the way back to February, but it illustrates the point nicely. Look, 9, 3, 8, 7, 7, 12, 9, 5, 3, 11, 9, 13. Like, the difference between 9 and 13 might not seem like that much, but that's actually like 45% more purchases in one day, right? Because those samples are so small. So it's going to make the CAC vary maybe a meaningful amount day over day. If you look, right, 53, 246, 92, 107, 112, 64. I mean, that's a huge, huge amount of variation. And that's not because anything is wrong with the bidding. That's the mistake to make here. It doesn't mean something is wrong with the bidding. What it means is people's behavior is erratic. It's all over the place. You can't predict it exactly. And so what you need to worry about is the blended average. And when we go and look over that same time period, okay, and this is the campaign where it seemed that the advertiser was saying that there was also a lot of struggle where he had to eventually turn it off. If you actually look over that time period and you look at the 7-day click, 1-day view attribution, there is still a lot of weekly variation. And again, I would actually say even sample sizes of these sizes are subject to lots of statistical noise. Okay. But now it looks a little more consistent over that time period. Now this is from March, as you can see in this window, down through the end of June, and again it ranges a lot: 125, 172, 185, 250, 105. This entire time the cost cap was set to 200, and you can see it doesn't really go beyond that. Now I'll tell you something really honest here. I actually don't know if you set a cost cap to $200 on 7-day click plus 1-day view. I'm not really sure if that is going to give you a click-only cost cap, or if it's actually a cost per result, or if it's going to actually include view. I have heard somewhere that that view is actually not in that consideration, and therefore. And Meta's own documentation on this is actually extremely confusing. It's not very clear about whether that's the case. It actually, and the behavior here makes me think it's not so, right? Because this is a $200 cost cap the whole time. You can see it is like, especially in here, as it ranges up, you can see it gets to a point where it really consistently hits right around $200. There's some range there, some statistical range, but it's pretty consistent. I mean, over this time period, it's on a pure 7-day click basis, it's there. The reason I don't actually know the answer to this question is because I never bid with view attribution anyway, so I just don't really care. So there's that, okay? So it's running really consistently. Then the advertiser gets really frustrated because on $10,000 in spend, it goes all the way up to $283 in CAC on a 7-day click basis, $223 here on 7-day click 1-day view, and he shuts it off because it's like way above target here. Now, I at this point am a little confused. Now you can see, by the way, if you just think back to the initial chart I started this call with, like when I'm looking at this, one of the things I see is, definitely some increase in CAC happening over time here. And we may be able to see some of this, but with a custom conversion rate metric where you've got, it's about the same over this time period. That said, another thing I noticed in this ad account is that conversion rate really tanked over a lot more time. So here's my initial read. Before I get to that, my initial read on what's going on over this sample size. When I see this CAC get up to 283 for 1 week on 37 purchases, my initial read is you should not have turned it off. That's just statistical noise. It's actually nothing. There's all it is noise, and nothing actually went wrong here. It's just that you have to get good at the idea that you're playing poker here, okay? And what I mean by that is when you play poker, the way you win is not by hitting every single time. You play the right hand in poker over and over and over again. You win over the aggregate. You don't necessarily win every hand. You're going to lose a lot of hands. And that's the way. And now, look, you do that enough times, you make a ton of money. And so that's the way that this ends up working out. And so that's the way I think you need to think about cost caps, bid caps, TROS, is you're playing poker. Play the right hand over and over and over again. Don't worry about if the other player gets the ace on the river. Don't worry about it. Play the same hand the exact same way next time because they won't get the ace on the river every single time. Okay, now that assumes there's people playing against you. That's not really that's where the analogy breaks down, but I hope you get what I mean by that. That's noise. That's statistical noise. It doesn't mean that somebody should have bet when they got that. Okay, blackjack might be a better example, but I'm not a blackjack guy, so there you go. All right, so that's the first thing I would say. Over here, what I would have done at this point is kept the campaign on because I would have said something is going on here, okay? Now, the problem is he turns it back on and it actually looks even worse. At first, it comes back right to the same spot here, and it looks even worse. Now, one thing I'll flag here is that if you're running 7-day click and you see your performance over the first 2 or 3 days of that process, like something is going wrong, nothing is necessarily going wrong. You need to allow the full 7 days to happen because you can't expect that on one day the CAC that you are getting is the same as the 7-day CAC that you bid for. That's a really important distinction, right? If you bid for $200 CAC and you have a $250 CAC after 1 day, you just got to wait for the next 6 days to pass, and probably people will purchase over that time period who clicked today, and that will end up lowering your CAC over that time period. Okay, but that's the idea. All right, so assuming there's statistical noise here, now there's another factor here that's really important too, and I'm gonna reload a different screen here and then show it to you. All right, I've loaded another screen here, which is the entire ad account from January through August, and I have a conversion rate metric here. Okay, and so what you'll see in these times when the performance looks a lot worse, when the CAC looks a lot worse, what you'll see is that the conversion rate goes way up into May. Maybe a Mother's Day bump or something like that. It's the only thing I think of. Like if this is mostly women's shoes, it goes down here in June. This is still pretty high, and then hits the tank in July and August. And this is something that I think is especially confusing about this. If we just go to that same campaign we were looking at earlier, we see the exact same thing happening here, where let's see, if we look, might help us a little bit more. Yes, if we look at this one campaign specifically, you see the same effect, right? Goes way up here and then goes down over this time. And so this is another thing that is very strange. So I reached out to the advertiser here to ask what was going on over that time, because this is where this gets really, really tricky. Now, I want you to think for a second about how cost caps and bid caps work, okay? The way they work is that at the that they have two prediction mechanisms built into them, and that is click-through rate and conversion rate. Okay, and so in the calculation that the machine learning is running, and this is actually documented, right? This is not me reading tea leaves. Meta has in 4-year bids in the auction, Meta has an expected click-through rate and an expected conversion rate. Well, you get a lot of clicks on every ad, right? You're constantly not dealing with small samples when you've got clicks, right? So if you look here, you'll see 18,000, 17,000 clicks, over a month, 10,000 clicks a month. So the expected click-through rate is not really a big deal for Meta to keep updated all the time. That's what factors into your cost per click. But for CAC to be calculated, you don't just need cost per click, you need cost per purchase, right? And that's going to be a matter of how many of those clicks actually convert. Now, by definition, purchases are the thing that accumulate the slowest of all conversion metrics, right? Why? Because it's the last step of the journey, okay? So it's the very bottom of the funnel, right? The funnel goes from big to small, and it's the last thing that happens. So the expected conversion rate, and there's a couple of other reasons for this, updates relatively slowly. And when I see a drop-off conversion rate like this looks to me like the kind of things that precisely is a scenario that cost caps and bid caps have a pretty hard time with, where the conversion rate drops off, particularly if there's some reason for it that is outside of the ad account that there's no way the ad account can realize. Like a classic example of this is if you run a sale and then your sale ends, let's say you run a 5-day sale and you get 1,000 purchases over that time, and let's say you put them all in one campaign, okay? Well, Meta's going to realize that you're converting, let's say, at 4% during your sale, or 5%. Let's call it 5%, okay? This is I'm just making this all up, okay? At 5%. But the moment your sale ends, those same exact clicks on the same exact ads might convert at 2.5%. But Meta doesn't know that. Meta doesn't know that you ran a sale in quite the same way. It has to relearn that as it accumulates more purchases at a lower conversion rate. And so the expected conversion rate is going to lag the actual conversion rate. This is, again, in a lot of ways, mostly a good thing. It means that it doesn't over-respond to exactly the kind of statistical noise that I referenced earlier on this video. It doesn't get 4 purchases in one ad set and go, woo, scale it, right? That's exactly what's great about it. That's exactly what I do with an ad set when I see 4 purchases. In this case, though, it doesn't do that. And so that's really good. The problem is, if this conversion rate is happening for some reason, and I talked to the advertiser, he didn't really know why it was happening. It was confusing to him as well. Like, let's just say it's straight up macroeconomics. Suddenly the same customer converts less for whatever reason, okay? If that's the reason why this conversion rate is dropping off, Meta's going to have a hard time reading that, and for a little while, it's going to overspend on relative to the cost cap. So if you have a $200 cost cap, eventually it will catch up. But for a little while, you might get, if the conversion rate gets cut in half, a $300 CAC or something like that. There is a solution to this problem, which is to proactively adjust the cost caps. And in general, if it's more important to you to keep efficiency than it is volume, you can do this in general when you're running cost caps and bid caps, right? If you have some reason, this is actually what you should do after a sale. For example, to use the example I mentioned earlier, you should proactively adjust the cost caps down, even if you need a different number than it's actually going to do, right? So let's say you're getting a $100 CAC during the sale ends, and let's say you still need a $120 CAC going forward. Okay, then you should maybe set the the cost cap after the sale at 60 or something like that, just to restrain Meta from spending too much when it has not yet updated the expected conversion rate. Okay, so in this case, that could be part of what's going on. The expected conversion rate is lagging the actual conversion rate, and therefore it's delivering it too high of a CAC. So what I would do managing this account is simply lower the CAC I would keep running this campaign for sure, and then I would just lower the cost cap proactively, and then watch the actual CAC that I get relative to the cost per result goal that I'm putting in there at the cost cap, and then keep managing it until they line up closer. Okay, once they line up closer, then you can just let it rip classically. Okay, but until then, that's what I would do. So I hope that's some help to you as I think through this kind of problem. There's all kinds of other things that could be happening here. This is not the only campaign in the account, but hopefully it's some help to you thinking through how to solve a problem like this.